When I kick it with black people and they're like, all white people are, I know why you're saying that. All the while, I have the privilege and luxury of not having generational trauma because my parents were born in Nigeria.
This is exactly the mentality that causes the drift between Africans and African Americans.
Yeah.
It's that mindset of him thinking because he comes from a Nigerian heritage, he doesn't have generational trauma that African Americans have.
Yeah.
And that highlights, actually, if a guy like him who sounds educated and all of that, it actually shows his lack of knowledge.
Right.
And he dismisses me as an African, I hear that. It's dismissive to the fact that he's assuming that we did not deal with generational trauma.
Right.
Has he heard of the term colonialism?
Right.
Do you think his name would have been Emmanuel, if white man didn't come to Africa?
Every day I come to realize that there are a lot of people out there that really don't understand exactly what colonization was and how damaging it was to our people. And that is why we hear them make statements like this. Because if you truly understand what colonization was, you wouldn't even have to go look for the trauma because they are not hiding. They are in plain sight. Every single day I step out, I see generational trauma in our people. But the thing is, these traumas have become normalized and now we live with them like, oh, that's just how we are. It's like because we were in a traumatized state for so long, that traumatic state became our norm. I wish I had like a better way to phrase it, but that's the best I can do right now. I like that brother earlier mentioned the fact that he, an African, now has an English name because of colonization. That's a very good example. And we have millions other Africans out there who bear English names now because of colonization. Some of them even have English names for surnames. Even our beloved planet is dealing with colonial trauma. Our planet could not handle all it saw. If our planet can be traumatized during colonization and till this day still has visible scars, till this day our planet can still feel the effects of colonization on her, why do you think the descendants of the people who experienced colonization did not inherit generational trauma? There is even talks about epigenetics and how colonization and slavery and all the stress that came with it that our ancestors unfortunately had to endure have somehow tweaked our genes. Like the matter deep, we have been going through a lot. And just like our planet, we still have visible scars. Colonization altered the eco balance of our planet the same way it altered our genes. But according to this brother, we have the privilege and luxury of not having to deal with generational trauma because we are on the continent. Science begs to differ though. The next evidence of generational trauma we're going to be looking at is the one associated with our health. Studies have said that some of the health issues we suffer from today, like mental health issue, anxiety, high blood pressure, etc., we inherited from our ancestors who got these health issues during colonization because of all the stress that they were under. And there are also studies that have looked into how colonization affects how we interact with present-day medicine, Western medicine. I want us to quickly take a look at this article together. This article was posted on the 16th of February 2021. Is the colonial era still impacting people's health today? A new study suggests that historical traumas from the French colonial era may be associated with less trust in modern medicine and lower vaccination rates today. For decades, colonized people in Cameroon and French Equatorial Africa were subjected to coerced medical interventions that were in many cases neither safe nor effective. A forthcoming study to be published in the American Economic Review suggests that nearly 100 years later, their descendants in present-day Central Africa still live with the effects of this historical trauma, less trust in modern medicine, and significantly reduced vaccination rates. The study by economists Sarah Loes and Eduardo Montero delves into the French military archives to extract geographically pinpointed data on a series of medical campaigns that were run in what is now Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Republic of the Congo, and Gabon between 1921 and 1956. Mapping these historic data against modern vaccination rates and proxy indicators of trust in medicine, the researchers found strong evidence that high exposure to the colonial campaigns produced an ongoing legacy of reduced health-seeking behavior. Historic wrongs. Colonial campaigns carried out by mobile units typically comprising soldiers, French doctors, and African nurses and potters targeted the control of a number of contagious diseases. The largest campaigns focused on human African trypanosomiasis, or sleeping sickness, a deadly parasitic infection transmitted by the tsetse fly. From many villagers, these encounters with the mobile units were often their first experience of Western medicine. The study reports that campaign methods were often dangerous. Exams were often carried out at gunpoint. Atozal, an early treatment for sleeping sickness, only worked against the parasite at doses almost lethal to the patient and caused partial or total blindness in some 20% of the people that were given it. It sometimes quickened death. A later drug, Lumidine, despite being considered too dangerous for Europeans, was prescribed as a prophylactic, meaning that even healthy individuals in a village would receive the ostensibly preventive injection. Side effects could include the onset of gangrene at the point of injection and death. By the late middle 20th century, it was widely accepted that Lumidine didn't, in fact, stave off infection. Present-day aftershocks. Historians and anthropologists have long recorded anecdotal support for the theory that the memory of campaigns like these can seed distrust in medicine amongst subsequent generations. But the new study produces statistically robust evidence from a large new dataset that is both far-ranging and geographically precise. Using immunization statistics from the DHS program, researchers Lowes and Montero devised a vaccination index equivalent to the completed share of 9 childhood immunizations. After controlling for an extensive range of historic and present-day variables, they found that being visited by the colonial medical campaigns for 15 years, the average number of years their areas of interest were accessed decreased the modern-day vaccination index by a significant 12.5% points. 15 years of campaign exposure also produced an 8.2% bump in present-day refusal of free finger prick blood tests for HIV and anemia, which the researchers nominated as a proxy measure for trust in medicine. Survey results from the Afrobarometer for Cameroon and Gabon corroborated those findings. Areas with high colonial campaign exposure were more likely to report no interaction with the health sector and longer durations without seeking medical care, even where there were zero reported difference in access to clinics. Future risk. Lowes and Montero also found indications of more diffuse consequences. Higher exposure to colonial medical campaigns predicted a lower success rate of health-related aid projects run by the World Bank, they found. Boosting future demand for health services may depend on finding ways to rebuild trust in medicine, the researchers concluded, and for that, understanding history may prove crucial. But let's bring this point to the more recent Rona pandemic. There are Africans, I know Africans, Nigerians, Kenyans who have said over their dead body they would never take the Rona vaccine. Trust issues over the roof, even though these Africans have not had any personal negative encounter with these people and their medicines. But they still don't trust them. Some of them don't even know why they don't trust them. All they know is that they don't trust them. That right there is generational trauma. But yeah, according to our brother, we on the continent have the luxury of not having generational trauma. In Nigeria, where I'm from, where the same guy is from, they make students, female students who attend public school, cut their hair. Like you have to shave your hair before you can attend public school in Nigeria if you are a female student. For my junior and senior secondary school education, I attended a public school. So for 6 years, I was forced to cut my hair. And I hear the same law exists in Ghana as well. We might find the same law in other countries on the continent as well, but I'm not quite sure. So I'm speaking for the two I am sure of, Nigeria and Ghana. And this freaking law came during colonization. Because you see, when the colonizers came, they started forcing Africans to cut their hair. And they did this because when they came, they saw that Africans placed a lot of value on their hair. So the African people, hair wasn't just hair. Hair says a lot about their culture, their tribe, their spiritual practices, et al. So their hair was greatly connected to their spirituality and their pride as African people. So when those colonial hoodlums sought out to subdue the African people and strip their pride off of them, they attacked and demonized their hair. So they forced African people to cut their hair because they knew that hair meant a lot to the African people. So making them cut their hair was one step at conquering them. It was also a step they took to embarrass them and make them feel small. The cutting of hair strategy was also used to make African women appear and feel less beautiful. They also said our hair was ugly and that it was a distraction. Now, when the colonial hoodlums started their educational system during colonization, they also infused this "you must cut your hair" law into their rules and regulations. But after the colonial hoodlums left, after colonization in quotes ended, in quotes because colonization never came to an end, if you know, you know, but you know, conversation for another day. After colonization in quotes ended, the educational system that the colonial hoodlums used to run was taken over by the government. But the government did not change anything. So all the laws that the colonial hoodlums had set, they literally carried on. And that's how and why till tomorrow, female students in public schools still have to cut their hair. As a female student, you might not want to cut your hair, but if a public education is all your family can give to you and you do want an education, you have no choice but to cut your hair and go to school.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair?
And that right there is an example of generational trauma. We inherited certain behaviors and fears that our ancestors were forced to abide by for their survival. But now we are no longer in survival mode like our ancestors were, but we still find ourselves doing these things anyways, not knowing why we do them. Second example of generational trauma is the beating of children. If you look into African cultures, you would find that they didn't used to beat children before colonization. As a matter of fact, various African cultures actually saw children as the reincarnation of the ancestors. They saw children as spiritual beings, so they were patient with them, they respected them, and they didn't used to lay hands on them. There is a saying I've heard a good number of times now, and I want to share the same with you guys as well. The first time I heard this saying, it shook me to my bone. And the saying goes like this: when you beat your child, you are beating your ancestors. Listen, the first time I heard that saying, a certain chill ran through my body. I be like, who they pour water? It was as if someone poured ice cold water over me. But of course, all of that changed when the colonial hoodlums came and put sand inside the African people's gari, disrupted their systems, and changed their living conditions. And they also came with their belief, spare the rod and spoil the child. There are a plethora of African sayings and proverbs across the continent, but the fact that you cannot find any African saying, proverb, or adage that is equivalent to the European biblical spare the rod and spoil the child saying says a lot. The saying basically tells us where the beating children mindset came from. It's not African. So if before colonization, Africans didn't believe in beating their children, but now post-colonization, we are seeing Africans beating their children, what we are seeing is trauma response. How this beat your child mindset got into the African people's mind was through the colonial educational system. Because you see, children went to the colonial hoodlum schools, right? And in these schools, they used to get beaten up. The colonial hoodlums were molding these children to be and act a certain way. And in order for them to achieve this, they were using that their spare the rod and spoil the child belief system of theirs. Children weren't treated nicely at all during colonization. These children experienced a lot of trauma. It is safe to say that eventually trauma became all that they knew. So these children slowly started picking up the mentality as well that the only way to correct children was through beating them. When you are trained a certain way, you see that way as the best way to go, right? So when the older generation goes and the younger generation that now has been trained that the best way to train up a child is by using the rod, that becomes the norm. These children were our great-great-grandparents. Where do you think all of that trauma went to? What happened to it? They didn't get therapy. So what do you think happened to the trauma? It trickled down. These children eventually birthed our great-grandparents, and our great-grandparents birthed our grandparents, and our grandparents birthed our parents, and our parents birthed us. And here we are, it's 2023, and we haven't addressed these traumas. The majority of us are not even aware that we might be walking around with inherited trauma. How we dress trauma response. The fact that we're in Africa is freaking hot here. We are supposed to have no business whatsoever with suit and tie, but we still wear suit and tie when going to work. So let me ask this brother, like our good brother asked him earlier, do you think that we will be wearing suit and tie in Africa if the white man had not come to Africa? How we speak. I'm speaking English right now, it's not my language. People who were colonized by the French speak French. People who were colonized by the Portuguese speak Portuguese. Again, let me ask this brother, like our good brother asked him earlier, do you think that we would be speaking English, French, Portuguese if the white man had not come to Africa? Our ancestors went through a lot. We are presently still going through a lot. So for this man to sit up here and talk about how we don't have generational trauma, there is evidence. You can see it on a daily, like I said earlier in the video. If you just open your eyes, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And there are a lot of examples as well, but unfortunately, we can't cover everything. This video is already, very long. So I'm going to have to end this video right here, but do let us know down below in the comment section. Is all of this new information to you, or did you know of this before now? Personally, have you been able to notice the pattern that is generational trauma? And have you been able to pinpoint any just by looking at how the people in your immediate society behave? Do you have examples of generational trauma that were not mentioned in this video? Please share with us down below in the comment section. Let's continue this conversation there. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I will see you guys in the next one.
All the while, I have the privilege and luxury of not having generational trauma because my parents were born in Nigeria.